Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the May 2020 UARC meeting. We have with us a few of our normal cast and crew. Morris, say something.
Something.
Okay.
Well, go ahead.
Oh, okay. We also have, we would normally have, oh, there's Chuck. Hey, Chuck, unmute yourself and say something now that you're back at the microphone.
Okay, I ran for a drink like you did, but I didn't get back by 7:30.
All right.
Welcome, everybody, and something, same as Morris.
And we are glad to see you in more than 16 pixels of resolution this time. We also have Gordon, Tom, WA7ZRG, and Bruce on here. Let's see, Morris, do you want to do the welcome and a few of the news items we have?
Yeah, well, sorry, you're striking the daylights out of me, Chuck. I just want to welcome everybody here. I'm pleased that we have as many people live in attendance watching this as we do. The last count I heard was something around 50. And I think that that's pretty terrific. I do want to mention one thing regarding in-person meetings. It's going to depend, of course, on two things, which are really only one thing: the coronavirus. Until the university opens up and allows us to use that room, we will not be having in-person meetings. We are hoping that that will happen in time for the September meeting, but I've heard words that they are going to cancel all in-person classes at the university for the fall semester. So we will see how that goes. Certainly we will notify you on the web page via email and on the correct, help me here, somebody.
The FaceTube?
Facebook, thank you, jeez. Going nuts. So anyway, we really hoping that that will happen. I am quite obviously of the older generation. I have more than one of the cautionary conditions besides my age, and so I'm not overly anxious to have in-person meetings until we get a real serious coast is clear kind of message. So Chuck, would you like to take the bit in your teeth here and say something useful? You'll need to unmute first.
I don't think I have anything useful to say other than my whole presentation that probably comes later.
Well, how about new upgrades and stuff like that? Or do we want to get that to Bruce?
Oh, haven't seen anything through on the chat about that. So
okay.
Just people's comments are basically hello.
Okay. Let's see. We do have a few people joining us. Our count is 57 right now on the YouTube stream. Again, if you have a Gmail account, make sure you log into your Gmail account, and when you go to the YouTube, you will be able to see the chat on the right side of the screen if you do not have it set to full screen. And welcome to do chats, say comments there. And then Chuck and Bruce will be commenting on those. If you're new or visitor rather, we'd love to hear from you. One of the visitors I did notice was our former president, NY4I, Tom Schaefer, who I believe lives in Florida or somewhere back east, but he was the president of the UARC in the late 90s, and he's still willing to talk to us. Submissions to the microvote. Gordon, tell us what you would like to see when, and also give us a little bit of a rundown on the testing sessions that are going on.
Well, let's see. On testing sessions, we really don't know if we're going to have the June session or not. It looks like some of the obstacles have cleared up, like the county letting us use the room and having an allowable group large enough for us to do a test. But we still need to check with the VEs and see if they're comfortable with getting together under the pandemic situation. As far as the microvolt, we'd love to have some people that say got a new piece of equipment and could write up a little something and tell us how well it worked. What did they like and not like about it? And, if you're not a great writer, that's okay. If you just tell me on the phone what you think, we can probably turn it into prose. We had somebody, non-member, write in and tell us all the things he'd like to see us do. Unfortunately, he didn't supply the names of the people who would be willing to do all those things. But we'd always be interested in photos from some of the public service events. I think there's some interesting things that happen there and some interesting things that are discovered in the process. So that's another possibility if somebody's in a position to give us some material. So always interested in getting some things we can publish about what different people are doing. And I think that's all I can think of.
Okay. Thank you, Gordon. As far as club updates go, let's see. Field day. We're still trying to figure out what exactly the lay of the land is. Some of the options have been as just everybody going out and doing their own thing. Families, very small groups, people have the same amount of virus or something like that. Although my understanding is that groups of up to 50 maybe are being allowed with appropriate precautions being taken. Regardless of what it is, the style of field day will certainly be different this year, no matter what we do. One of the things that's been talked about as far as the club goes is since our club equipment really isn't really appropriate for just lending out because of liability reasons. Maybe a scaled down field day with a smaller number of people up there. But we really haven't decided what the best way is because things are changing all the time. As far as steak fry goes, Morris, you want to mention what your thoughts are about steak fry? What we're going to do?
Well, we're going to wait until next month and sort of see what's going on. I believe that they have opened that park up, though I'm not absolutely positive of that. Does anybody know the answer to that question?
It would probably be still snowed in at this point, but I haven't looked to see any official report.
All right, so we will check it out before next month's meeting and give you a definitive answer then. And we would really like to be able to do it, but it's with all of the pandemic restrictions and concerns, we are concerned that there will be a lot of people that will be not willing to come and share their air with us, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So that's where we're at as far as I know right now. More updates next month. Back to you, Clint.
Okay. And I think the last thing on our update too is club repeaters. We think we have fixed the tone on 7.6. It continued to do it after we got there, which was unlike the first trip. So a week ago Monday, when we went up there, it was making a tone, and even when we disconnected stuff and started bashing it, it still made a tone, and it became obvious it was a control circuit in the power amplifier that had gone bad. And I had enough stuff in the junk box that I brought with me to kludge a temporary one. Temporary as in it could probably be left there for years, but at some point we're going to replace some parts of the transmitter, but we don't have to worry about it doing that again. Anyway, let's see, Chuck, before we go on, have you seen anything in the we want to talk about, or any comments and pertinent topics in there before we go along with your short blurb?
We have a couple of new members, Jonathan Morrison, KJ7BCD, and Sterling Snyder, K7EDG, and a first-timer, KJ7LDW, Mike Williams. That's all I've seen so far.
Okay. Do you want to, you have a little presentation too, as far as, let's see, people who are watching may be aware of the fact that UARC does have a remote HF station, 1.5 remote HF stations, one down at Leamington, another one at the WA7X's cabin, both in central Utah. And we're planning some major upgrades to the Leamington site, and that is putting a beam up on the tower to supplement the 2 wire antennas that we already have. Chuck, you've been working hardly on that. Tell us what you've been doing and do your show and tell.
Okay. Well, I have. When this first came up last fall, I foolishly volunteered to see what I could do about a remote control for the rotator that we would need to go with this. And I have a little bit of experience playing with Arduino controllers, and so like I said, I foolishly volunteered. So the plan was to build an Arduino Uno based controller, and there's a nice design in the Arduino for Ham Radio Book 2 that was a modification for a Yaesu controller, the simpler one than the one we have. So I bought the Uno, and okay, where's the next page thing? There we are. And a perf board to build an interface. And so here's the entire interface to the controller from an Uno. If I left off the switch and the LEDs, which are just for status and control, that's it. 5 wires. It's a nice TTL interface, so it was practically nothing for the electrical interface to it. I had purchased this 4 relay board thinking we would need relays to control whatever rotator we got, but it turns out I didn't need that. I'll get back to that in a minute. So here it is all stacked up. The Arduino on the bottom, the perf board in the middle, a relay board on the top.
Okay, this is the G2800 rotator that we bought. And it came with the G2800 DXA fancy remote control. It has a speed control. You can dial what setting you want it to go to and push start, and it takes you there. It was missing the pointer. Doug Bozen has printed me a replacement of that. And in the cable in the back from the still picture comes over to the Arduino controller. The Arduino hooks by a USB cable to the computer. So we come to the computer and type in a command, and L makes it go left. See, the left LED came on, and it's turning. And if we do a C command, it gives us the position in degrees. And I took it all the way back to 0. Now if we want to move it somewhere, we say like M100, turn it to 100 degrees, and it takes off and goes. The controller has ramp up and ramp down, so it'll slow down when it gets to the end. There it is, slowing down. And we come back and type a C, and the position is 101, pretty close.
Okay, so now for your interface, you won't have to type all that stuff in. RC4 will take care of all that. There'll probably just be a little dial on the interface that you turn to, and the rotor will follow. And in talking to Gary, who's engineering this thing, since I had the relay board, we played with the code and added some features so I can turn those relays on and off, and we can do whatever we want with those. Maybe switch antennas. We don't know what yet, but that's 4 generic relays that are built in for future expansion. So I think we're ready to go. And that's about it.
All right, thanks, Chuck. Yeah, that looks very good. And as I said, I'll get you that connector tomorrow.
The sketch for this came out of that Arduino book, and it was a really good start. I maybe modified 10% of the code, but it was just real easy to do with a nice head start from the book. So.
Right. Yeah, and the rotator has most of the smarts already built into it.
Yeah, that's really nice. That ramp up and ramp down and so on was all automatic. In fact, I had to tweak the code just a little bit to deal with that because the ramp down made it overshoot about 3 degrees, but I fixed that.
Okay. All right. Sounds good. Yeah, we don't have an antenna for that. That's a discussion that we're going to have at the next board meeting, but we have one in mind. So, all right. I did see a comment on here that the 7.6 repeater was reportedly a bit noisy. One thing we have noticed, and this is true on Farnworth as well, that over the past winter, a lot of things have come loose on the busy radio sites. And when that happens and the wind is blowing, things get all crackly. We're not aware of a specific problem with the 7.6 repeater. And usually when the noise is something like that, there's a nearby tower that has some loose hardware on it. So not sure what the problem is, but thanks for pointing that out. We'll look into it. Let's see, Morris, anything you want to talk about before we get into the meeting? I'll send it over to Tom after that too, to remind everybody on how they join, renew, and UARC and ARRL. Throw it to Tom when you're done.
Okay. No, I don't think there's anything that I wanted to talk about, unless you can remind me of something that I've forgotten again. One question I did have of Chuck. Do we have a target date for the installation? Sort of a target month, if we will?
Well, I think Gary's planning on doing something the end of May, but since we don't have an antenna yet, it would be a bit premature to pick a date for that.
Yeah, I guess that's right. We need to have a meeting and get that issue settled first. Okay. All right, go ahead, Tom.
Okay. Yeah, hi, I'm Tom Kemlowski, WA7ZRG. I'm the Utah Amateur Radio Club secretary. And I just wanted to thank everyone for, doing things a little bit differently because of the fact that we're not able to meet up at the University of Utah and pay your membership dues in that way. As we've already talked about here this evening, UARC has got an incredible amount of things going on. We've got these antenna and rotor projects that are going on up at Leamington. We've got 2 repeaters that we're maintaining, the 7.6 repeater and the 6.2. Those things don't just sit up there, as you well know, and operate. There's a lot of care and feed that has to go into that. And so we really do appreciate all of our members that choose to renew or choose to join UARC. It really does make a difference. It helps us in many, many ways. The Microbolt is a publication that we've had out for many, many years, and Gordon, has tirelessly worked on that. None of us receive compensation for any of this. Everything's done on a cost basis only, and so it's a good use of the UARC money that comes in, and we really do appreciate all of our membership when you just make that decision to join. I think most of you know how to do that. If you get onto the Utah Amateur Radio Club webpage, there's a link on the left-hand column that says how to join. All you have to do is click that link. It'll take you to a page where you can either add your membership or your renewal or that of a family member, and you can pay online. And you don't have to have a PayPal account in order to pay online. All you need is a bank card even. And for the few people that are not comfortable doing it that way, there's always the snail mail, and the address on how to do it that way to put a check in the mail, that works as well. So I just wanted to thank everybody for what a good job they've done in getting their memberships current and renewing. And, just recognize that there's a lot of benefit that we get out of this thing. And I wanted to really make sure that all of the membership out there understood how much the board really appreciates that, and how it really does push this club forward. It's a big motivation to keep us going. So that's pretty much what I wanted to say on that, Clint. Why don't you go ahead?
All right, thank you very much, Tom. Anyway, tonight's meeting topic, if you've been following the announcement, is about WebSDRs. And since many of you know that I have a little to do with the Northern Utah WebSDR, that's a good example of the sort of thing that we're talking about. There's music that goes with this, but out of difference of copyright, I will not play it. Here we are flying over the building that's there. It's interesting. It looks like it's, here we come up on the beam itself. As you can see, it is surrounded by lots of water. Much of it is marshy and swampy. That's the log periodic beam, good for 6 megahertz through 40 megahertz. We're using it on all bands 40 through 10 meters. At the present time on WebSDR number 4. And the drone flown by Gary disturbed the owl that lives, our resident owl that lives up there. Around the base of the tower, you can find a lot of owl pellets and that sort of thing. So they do a good job of keeping their rodents down. Coming up here on the wire antenna, this is the 94-foot tall omnidirectional log periodic antenna. Which is truly a monster. I think it's the most impressive antenna on site. A tangled maze of wires, each doing their own thing, with the longer elements at the top for the lower frequencies and the higher frequency elements at the bottom. And this one covers, as I mentioned, 3 to 30 megahertz. And that drone footage was shot by Gary, KK7DV, about a year or so ago. If you're wondering what a WebSDR is, it's a free-to-use web accessible receiver resource. And what that means is if you have a computer and a browser and an internet connection, you can use remote receivers all over the world. The one local to us is you can find at sdrutah.org. But if you want to find where they are in the entire world, go to websdr.org. As I mentioned, this one's located west of Corinne, at what had been an abandoned HF research site. It's in the middle of a field, as I mentioned. It's pretty sparse there, nothing there but cattle. And it was a site originally installed in around 1973 for research into data transmission on HF, voice and traffic and all that. My understanding, it was actually also used as a signal source for SAC bombers when they were flying around carrying their load of who knows what in the sky. for the Strategic Air Command. In the late 80s or in the early 80s, the site was abandoned until 93 when the site was reactivated. And the third antenna was installed, which is this wire antenna, which is the omnidirectional log periodic antenna. More about that in a moment. But its purpose was for ionospheric research or chirp sounders. Now, I'm sure if you've ever listened on HF, you've heard what sounds like some HF, a signal just tuning past you, like a twit sound, like whoop. That's what these are, is these key down, and from about 3 megahertz to 30 megahertz, they transmit continuously. And there are receivers all around the world synchronized to listen to them. And with this information, they're able to do a 3D map of the ionosphere real time. If you look for chirp sounder maps and things like that, you will see the 3D charts from this showing where the ionosphere is working, at what height, at what frequency, and what part of the world. Now, in around 2006, one of the 2 towers fell down in a storm after the guy wire pulled out of the ground. And so there's only the one beam left now. And sometime around 2008, the funding for the chirp sounders stopped, and the site was just abandoned. Gear was left there, the door was just closed, and it was left, and it was in that state when we went to the site in 2017, in which Michael, KC0JRE, became aware of the site and managed to negotiate with the landowner to allow us to put stuff there, like a receiver of some kind. And it was decided that the best thing to do was the receive-only configuration, so we could do the best bang for the buck. And that was in the form of a Web Sdr system, which, as you'll see, can be used by hundreds of people or 100 people plus at one time. And this came to fruition in 2008 when we got the power back up and we got internet connection back up, established out there on the site, the last day of February. So this system's been on the air for on the net for a little over 2 years now, and we've done our best to grow it. Now, if you're interested in that big antenna, here it is. Lots of wires. There's actually 4 sets of elements, 2 on the, say, the north and south, a pair on the north-south side of the tower, and another pair on the east-west side of the tower. They're all phased together, sort of rotating downwards. And it forms an omnidirectional antenna that has gain a little bit to the skyward. But it also isn't completely either vertically or horizontally polarized. It's a bit circular, which kind of makes it insensitive to what kind of antenna you are using. The thing is 94 feet tall, and it has a 250-foot radius footprint in it. And it's for transmitting, it's good from 3 to 30 megahertz, which is why they used it for that chirp sounder. We have poked around and discovered that if you wanted one of these antennas for your very own installed, you only need to shell about $60,000 to $80,000 depending on where you are, and you can have one. It is usable on receive down to about 400 kilohertz, and we use it for receiving on 160, the AM broadcast band, and the 630 meter amateur band. And as I mentioned, it's horizontal-ish when you're looking skyward like NVIS, but mostly circular when you get down near the lower angles. And it has lots and lots of wires. And let's see. And here's a line drawing of what we're talking about, because if you've ever tried to take a picture of a wire antenna, you know it's very tough to do. As you can see, the lower frequency elements are on top and the shorter, higher frequency elements are on the bottom. And this is what it looks like in real life against nice snow-capped mountains. Now there is another antenna on the site, and that is this monster here. It's the high gain LP 1002. We only recently got that online because the feed line had been cut from the top, and to our knowledge, there's no feed line going between it and the building anymore. We're not sure where it went. Now, this antenna consists of 1,400 pounds of mostly aluminum at 82 feet above the ground. And the boom is 64 feet long, and the longest element is 81 feet. So this is truly a big monster. And even from the ground, unlike most antennas, it still looks big. And its design frequency range is 6 to 40 megahertz. So it covers 40 through 10 meters without any trouble. And the gain is between 10 and 13 dBi, which means that if we were to put 1,000 watts into it, we'd end up radiating between 10,000 and 14,000 watts effective radiated power. But we're only using it on receive, which means that we're able to use the gain to get signals from the direction which is pointing, which is east, and avoid signals from other directions. And it is not rotatable. Here you can see someone on the tower on this picture. You probably see somebody hanging off there. Gary took that a couple of weeks ago with me hanging off the tower, reconnecting the feed line, ran a new feed line for the entire vertical length, and for the first time in who knows how long, and got the thing back up and running again. Now, if you're wondering what the beam pattern of that antenna is, this is where it covers in the US. As you can see, it was intended to cover pretty much the eastern US, which fits with what we know about the site, research site from back east. And it covers a bit into Texas and into Canada. And the purple area is kind of where we're off the side of the beam, where the gain might be 0 dB or lower, so the gain of a dipole or lower. It doesn't have a really good front to back ratio like a lot of Yagis do, but that's just normal for these monstrous log periodic antennas. They just are intended to squirt power in one direction and not intended to really reject stuff from the sides and the back. And if you were transposing this on the world, you can see that it's kind of pointed at South Africa. And if you go long path, it's kind of pointed at Australia and New Zealand, if you kind of imagine the V coming back together from around backside of the Earth. It kind of, at the very top edge, you can see it kind of barely catches the Mediterranean. But based on what we can tell, it actually does hear Europe reasonably well. Even though it doesn't have a lot of gain toward Europe, it does have a low angle of attack at even off the side of the beam, which is what you need for DX. Now, you might be wondering too, is if you have one antenna, what about the many receivers? Well, there are at least 18 receiver modules. Actually, there are more than that now. There's probably 24 or 25 now that cover for the bands in question. And a lot of these had to be built by hand. And this is an example of what we're looking at. Some of these receivers up here, you see the green boards, they're soft rock boards, along with, I don't know if you can see the cursor, but near the middle of the screen, down a little bit to the left of center and below, you see another board, and those are QRP Labs soft rock frequency synthesizers, and lots of filtering to keep AM stations and other stations from getting into and overloading all the receivers on site, and for lightning protection. So we have to accommodate both these narrowband receivers, which just cover one hand band. We also have wider band receivers, which we'll get to in a moment. And as I said, good filtering is imperative because you need it not only to keep strong signals from the AM broadcast band from blowing things out of the water, but for lightning protection. And also you want to make sure that the really, really strong shortwave broadcast stations that we blast in from back east around this time of day don't overload the daylights out of everything. And that's the problem we've been having recently, especially with the beam that we added. And if you're a masochist, you can take a screenshot of that drawing and figure out how everything goes where. all this information is available on the sdrutah.org page. You can find schematics and block diagrams if you're so interested in how everything goes together. Now, when we first put this together, we had one rack with one server in it back in 2018, and we covered the most popular bands. We covered 160, most part of it, just part of 75 meters, which is the upper part, 60 meters, 40 meters, and AM broadcast, which gave us is what gave us our 160 meter coverage. It was kind of a nice, neat layout, but of course things kind of grow, and we have 3 servers in this rack now, a 4th one in another rack, which isn't pictured, and we are now covering every single amateur band up through 2 meters. Not all the bands, but every single amateur band from 2,200 meters through 2 meters is at least covered partially. Plus, we cover a bunch of the shortwave broadcast bands as well. This is the backside of the same thing. Lots and lots of cables, because that's how you got to do things, make it accessible. That's interesting. I didn't realize I had a duplicate slide, but now you got to see it twice. And the other thing we have too is we have WhisperNet coverage on all the HF bands, 2200 through HF, and we'll get to that in just a moment. Now, the servers themselves are Linux based, typically Debian or Ubuntu. We're using Ubuntu, and although the software is not open source, it's free to anyone who's serious about putting together a decent system. You kind of have to convince the guy that wrote the software that you are serious about doing that. And it'll run on a PC or Raspberry Pi, but as you can imagine, the Raspberry Pis have very limited horsepower, so they cannot do the full load that a PC could. And to use this system, once again, you only need a device with a modern web browser to use it, which could be a computer, phone, or a tablet. And let me emphasize that again, that's all you need to use it. You don't need to log in, you don't need a user password, you do not need to pay anything, just something with a browser. Now, the receivers, if you're wondering about how those are working, most of the receivers are using sound cards with a soft rock type receiver. And essentially those just convert HF to audio. And we get 16 bits of audio with 2 converters, and we can cover up to 192 kilohertz of spectrum per device, because that's as big as sound cards go spectrum-wise. Now, we do have some lower performance receivers as well, which are those $20 RTL SDR dongles, which allow us to cover up to 2 megahertz. And those can work, but you have to jump through a lot of hoops to keep them from being overloaded. You just cannot connect them to an HF antenna and expect them to work very well without extra help. Now, you may wonder who it is that started all of this. If you go to the WebSDR.org website, that's out of the University of Twente in the Netherlands. And you can see a list there of active servers around the world listed in approximate order of how busy they are. And how busy they are is a good estimation of how good a receivers they have too. There are WebSDRs that cover from audio range to the 10 gigahertz band. If you want to hear what that S-Hail satellite that's over Africa sounds like in Europe, where people are going up on 2 gig sideband and coming down on 10 gig from a geostationary satellite, you can go to one of several WebSDRs and hear what's going on there. It was written by this guy, Dr. DeBoer, is an interesting fellow who seems to be a professor of practically everything computer related at this university. And in 2007, he decided that it would be a good idea to make a 25-meter radio telescope available via the web. And that was the germ of the WebSDR project. And he got that thing running in fairly short order and the very first WebSDRs in Europe were online in 2008. So these things have been around for about a dozen years. And today there's about 180 of these things scattered all over the world. And here's a map you can get to from that WebSDR.org site. And you can see it covered. Most of the continents are represented. There doesn't seem to be one in Antarctica, but that's not too surprising. Bandwidth is a bit precious down there. But Europe is very well covered. Brazil is for some reason, But you notice there aren't very many WebSDRs in North America, even though it's one of the more sparsely populated, more distributed rather, around the world, around the country rather. Now, as I mentioned, everyone has their own virtual receiver. They can tune them independently, frequency and mode. So one of the displays you might get like is this from WebSDR1. You can select the band you want to be on, 160 through 40 meters on this one, on the yellow one. But you can click on some of these others and get other bands up through 6 meters or even 2 meters. Or if you're curious, you can get down to 2,200 meters. But everyone sees their own version of the waterfall. They can turn on their own filtering and everything like that, select their own mode and tune around. And there are times when the number of users of the Northern Utah WebSDR exceeds 140 across the 3 servers. If you go to the WebSDR.org site, you'll see that there's a site in the Netherlands that actually will have plus over 300 users at a time on it. And that's just a matter of how much bandwidth and how powerful of a computer you have. And it doesn't really matter. Everybody gets their own virtual receiver to play with. And as I said, it's just a browser. Now, why would you want to use a WebSDR? A lot of people just use it as a general purpose receiver because it's easy to do. I mean, you just fire up a computer and listen on your nice computer speakers. You don't have to worry about connecting your antenna. But another main reason is maybe your site is a bit noisy. Power line noise, somebody put up a solar power system, there's switching supply noise. Notice I spelled switching supply wrong. The other thing too is if you don't have any HF receiver at all, this is a good way to listen to what you could be having if you wanted to set up your own station. You can listen anywhere in the world too, so you can spot DX, although it's not kosher in most instances to use the WebSDR to as your own receiver if you're working a contest or something, but there's nothing preventing you from noticing the DX is on the air, then firing up your own station if you want to do that. Another reason why you might use it is because it'll often hear stations that you can't. A good example of this is on the Beehive Utah net, which occurs around noon local time in Utah, because 40 meters has a dead zone of about maybe 150 to 200 miles. If you're closer than that, very often stations can't hear you. So a WebSDR in California is often used for that. Likewise, people on California nets often use the Utah WebSDR because they're too close to the main WebSDR that's in the Bay Area at Half Moon Bay. The other thing to do is learn how the HF bands propagate. I mean, if you have access to a good receiver station, you can tune around the bands and listen to what you're hearing. Also, if you want to say work somebody in England, you can go to a WebSDR in England and see if it can hear stations in the US or even your own station if you're curious. Another thing to do is to compare and test your own antennas. If you have more than one antenna that you want to check out, or if someone that lives near you, not too far away, maybe across town, has another antenna you want to compare, go to the WebSDR and do an A/B comparison and see how they're getting out. Do it at more than one WebSDR. Utah is one, across, Half Moon Bay is another one. Go to one across the country in the east and just see how your antennas are getting into that one A/B comparison. I did this one time with on 160 using my lazy loop operated as the top-headed vertical and also a vertical that I have on the roof of my house. And what I did was I set down a carrier and tuned it in. You can see the vertical line there on the screen, and looked at the S meter, and there's a plot, signal strength plot you can bring up, and it shows you what the signal is doing. You can see here the signals are going up and down, but if you do a comparison here, this is an annotated chart showing the two antennas. The blue parts are the my lazy loop run as the top hatted vertical. And then for the yellow part, I switched to a butternut 9-band vertical on my roof. And then I switched back again to the big antenna. And as you can see, the two are fairly comparable. The bigger antenna has obviously a slightly better signal, but it's not by a whole lot. It's kind of hard to tell from the QSB on the band, but that's normal for the band. You can do things like that. A friend of mine, Mike, WA7ARK, which some of you may have known, has been building and modeling antennas for years and has often used the Web SDRs around the country just to see if one antenna is better in one direction or apparently overall than other ones. And there's nothing like using it on the air to see if an antenna works. You can also select the filters if you want. If you're listening on sideband and want to make the filter wide, there's these brackets where the signal is on the waterfall, and you can grab them to make them wider and narrower if you have QRM, or you can use the buttons in the passband tuning selection to make them narrower or wider to get rid of interference from a nearby station. And also you can record off the air signals. There's a little record start button just below the volume control. And if you are setting up an HF station, I do recommend that occasionally you record yourself and play it back to see how you sound. Because if you have an audio problem, muffled audio, hum, something, a bit of distortion, something like that, there's nothing like being able to hear your own signal or someone else's to let them know if there's a problem. And being able to diagnose other people's signals is really helpful, because sometimes people may not understand the description you're giving them. Like, what does distortion sound like? What does muffled or sibilant sound like? Well, give them their own audio and transmission to see what it's as a demonstration. Also for posterity, if you check into a net and want to record what's happened, or friends or something, or if there's some traffic that was handled and you want to make sure you got everything right, you can do a recording and go back and listen to it. There are also nets on the little orange or brown tags on the screen. You click on those, and it'll set you the frequency. You can set your own custom tags too. They're green. If you want to have a way to click to the frequency of where you and your friends go to on a round table. And we have many popular nets on there, and if you have a net that's not shown on there, we can add it. And occasionally we have things for like WWV and some of the shortwave broadcast stations and things like that. And we have the tags just because we can. Now, a lot of you on modern radios have seen these waterfall displays. The newer signals are at the bottom, and they rise up over time. And the stronger the signal is, the lighter colored it is. So it gives you an at-a-glance view of a good chunk of the band and what is going on now and what has been going on. Here you can see a whole bunch of sideband signals where various QSOs are, so you know right where to tune if you want to listen on the bands. And you can adjust the speed and the size of the waterfall if you like. And you can make it more or less sensitive if you want to see weak signals better, or if you want to darken the display, you can do that. And you can also select a spectrum display that looks more like a spectrum analyzer. That only shows what's real life, but it is a bit faster if you want to see what's going on. And there's also this, you can also see who else is on the waterfall display. Below the waterfall, you can see this list of mostly IP addresses, but you can put your call sign in there if you like. And if you want to see where all your friends are hanging out, you can go over there. If you have a slow network connection, you can actually adjust the amount of buffering. Typically, about a quarter second is okay, but you can select less or more if you want to affect the latency. But even if you're on a round table or a net, half a second or even a second of buffering isn't really going to make you sound like you're too disjointed. Now, there's other things up there besides the WebSDR. We have Kiwi Sdr receivers that covers from 0 to 30 megahertz. And they're like a WebSDR, except they have a limited number of users, 6 or 8 or so. But they don't have the gaps like the WebSDR does that covers just the bands. But the trade-off is they're not as good a performance, because if you're converting or digitizing a whole spectrum all at once, you're more prone to overload and things like that from your digital converter. One of the things we have too, as mentioned before, is WhisperNet spot reporters. And at the Northern Utah, we have WhisperNet spot reporting on all of the HF bands and the LF and MF bands. So everything from 2200 through 10 meters is being recorded. And here in Utah, we can receive 1/4 of all of the whisper spots that occur in the world that anyone knows about. Now, the best spots, receivers of similar ilk, occur in Europe, where they can hear a little more than 1/3 of them, because there are just simply more whisper stations in Europe than there are in the US. But that amounts to 10,000+ whisper spots per day that fall on those antennas and get reported. The other thing that happens up there too is kind of free with the whisper recording is there are constant HF noise measurements going on that contribute to the ionospheric and propagation research. I can talk about those briefly if anyone's interested. But we're able to, there's actual honest to God, peer-reviewed academic research going on where the noise is being studied from these receivers and others around the world like it, and contributing to actual science. Now, some of you have heard about on Newsline or read in QST or something like that about earthquake research where they're looking at HF noise. We don't do that. They haven't approached us, but similar things can happen. And the reason that's possible is because the site is pretty quiet in terms of power line noise. We're usually able to hear the lowest noise there is on the band. And this is kind of what it looks like. If you look at the top of the line of the screen, the top green and yellow line is what 80 meters looks like at times. This is over a period of a day. No, actually that's 20 meters. Actually, that is 80 meters. We see a bit of at night the noise comes up and it goes down, and then there were some very strong whisper stations that were causing the deflection to go up. On the middle bar, you see sort of the blue and purple. You see how in the the bottom blue and red lines, you see 20 meters, and at night the band is dead, but in the daytime the noise comes up, and also to do the signals. And farther than that, you see 17 and 10 meters. And as the bands open up and they get noisier and more signals show up, these indicate that. Now, what else is up there? Well, besides the radios, there's a weather station that's up there too. And one of the things that we get asked about too is having tours of the site. Well, in deference to the landlord, we prefer not to do that. But a few of the people who have been up there can tell you that it's not a nice place to be. Unless it's winter, when it's really cold, what you get out there are mosquitoes and deer flies. And we've had a lot of visitors who've simply had to retreat to the car in a big hurry when they've made the mistake of wearing a short sleeve shirt and shorts in any time of the year other than the winter. I've been told by the landowner that a cow will lose half a pint of blood per day from the mosquitoes and deer flies. So it's probably a good idea for you not to be up there or hang around too long. But anyway, you can see about as much as you'd want to see from the highway or from looking at the pictures on the website. So a few commonly asked questions: what browsers work? Pretty much all of them do. I would not recommend Internet Explorer, however, or Edge, because they don't seem to be compatible with much of anything. But I'm told that they do kind of work, but I never use them. Safari generally works. Best one is Firefox. You can almost can't go wrong with Firefox. Chrome kind of works. They're always breaking things on Chrome. Anyone who uses Chrome knows. Another question that comes up is, will you make it so we can transmit on this? And the quick answer is no, because if you've ever been at field day, you know how difficult it is to have a receiver that works well anywhere near a transmitter. It'll be like shouting in your own ear. There's no way you can do that. Plus, the physics of it just don't work. For example, if you want to receive something, you just take signals that are billions and billions of a watt and send them around and to multiple receivers and make them available. But if you wanted to have a 100-watt transmitter, every single user would need their own 100-watt transmitter and radio to go with it, and then still somehow avoid overloading all the receivers on site when you transmit, which is a very difficult thing to do, which is one of the reasons why UARC and other clubs have remote transmitter sites you can use if you're a member. What about a rotatable antenna? I did mention that big beam is fixed. If you think about it, if 100 people are using an antenna that could be rotated, where would you point it? So if we were to add another antenna with gain like that, we could stick another one on the tower, but it too would be fixed, but possibly pointed in a direction that people might find useful. I don't know, maybe Asia or something, or Europe, who knows? But the proper thing to do would be just to add another server. So if you wanted to listen to Europe, you go to the Europe one, or you go to a WebSDR that listens in Europe. And you might ask too, who supports this and how can you help support it? Well, a lot of this comes out of our pockets, but we do have a PayPal button on the side, as do a lot of these other WebSDRs. And we're happy to accept any donations. And that's what is used to pay the power bill, the site rental, the insurance, and buy some of the gear that goes up there. But a good chunk of it has just come out of the back pockets of about half a dozen to a dozen volunteers up on the side. And if you're interested, it's a 501c3 organization, so you can deal with that if you want. Anyway, hopefully you've had some questions. And let's see, Chuck, I will unshare here. And have you seen questions pop up? That's oh, Chuck is on the phone. Bruce, have you seen questions come by that would people have about this thing? You might need to unmute if you talk. You're not unmuted, Bruce. Let's see.
I got to get the right mouse. Sorry.
Okay.
The only questions, let's see, donations, how to fund it. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. If you go to any of the WebSDR pages on the left side, you'll see a button that includes PayPal. You don't have to have PayPal. People have sent us, literally, I've gotten cash in an envelope in the mail, which is fine. But most people donate by PayPal, and you don't even need a credit card to do that. There's full instructions on there. So we appreciate any help we can get. I did see a comment about the browser. It looks like Mr. Lawrence said that Brave works. I'm not familiar with the Brave browser, but it's good to know. Pretty much anything that supports HTML5 and a bit of JavaScript should work.
Let's see, Holy Mindless says New Age should be okay, which is a Chrome-based browser.
Oh, okay. Yeah. If you run across a browser that doesn't work, try it and let us know. There is a link to an email. If you have to look for it a little bit, there's a link to an email. It's sdrinfo@sdrutah.org. But where you can report technical issues. We have had issues with some of the Apple-based browsers because Apple keeps changing how the browser identifies itself to the server. They change them at random without telling anybody, so we keep having to reverse engineer stuff. Any other questions coming up?
Oh, and Tom Schaefer in Florida says, this is cool. We just sent an FT8 signal and from Florida and saw it on the waterfalls. So,
right,
and
yeah, yeah. Now we do get occasional questions asked about how to do FT8 using the WebSDR. The WebSDR itself cannot do that. However, what you can do is you can, with like something like virtual audio cable, pipe the audio from your own browser to the program of your choice for that or any other mode. And you can actually see what's going on. And you can kind of get a clue as to what you're missing or do your own test if you like. That's a bit of a pain, but you can do that. And apparently quite a few people do that.
Is there just the two SDRs in the western half of the U.S., the one that we have and the one in Half Moon Bay?
Yeah, the two of them, that's not quite true. There are two of them that work really well and several others that kind of work well. So if you go to the sdrutah.org, you see 4 WebSDRs there. You have the yellow one here. They're all color coded out of convenience. This is for the lower bands, as you can see, 80 through 160 through 40 meters. And this is on the omnidirectional antenna. And we can click on signals here and hear them. One thing that I forgot to update on there is I recently wrote code to add Dsp Noise Reduction, so you can get that and notch filtering on here. So you can have more of the features that your radio and your SAC has now. So just added this about a month and a half ago. I added it to the code. The green server, excuse me?
Is this a live picture?
Yes, this is a live picture. So you go down to 75 meters. What the horizontal lines you are seeing are static crashes. And to demonstrate what's going on, there's a site called Blitzertung, or however you say it in German. I'll bring that up here. And this is the live, and this is very worth knowing about. And you can see the picture there. Those are actual lightning strikes live. And you can see why it is that the bands are so damn noisy right at the moment. There's obviously a storm front running through the Midwest, and that is why 40 and 80 and 160 get so dang noisy during the summer, especially when there's thunderstorms. And these horizontal lines you're seeing on here are solely a result of all the incessant static crashes that are going on. Now, if you go up to the green server, which is 30 through 6 meters, there's a lot fewer crashes. You can see a few of them here, but you can see the few signals that are still up there during this time of the evening. I doubt if if you scroll down further, you can see where the people are hanging out. Looks like we have 11 people on here, including me, half a dozen or so people on 20 meters, and there's somebody hanging out up on 10 meters. So we can click on 10 meters right here and go to 10 meters and see if we see any signals. And we probably don't, because at least during this time of the sunspot cycle, 10 meters isn't usually open. Although we have started having sporadic E openings on 10 meters, which can occur any time of day or night, actually. We have the blue server, which includes 2 meters, and I notice a lot of people hanging around here, often listening to 6.2, but it's also our backup for 80 and 40 meters should our yellow server go down, because 80 and 40 are by far the most popular bands. But it also includes 630 meters, which is being bombarded by lightning static too, and 2200 meters as well, which is more of like 160 or more winter bands. And finally, we have the magenta or purple server, which is hooked up to the beam antenna. I'll click on that, and we see our coverage map and all that, but we also see what the band looks like on a beam that doesn't hear very well to the west. And especially during the day, you can actually hear Europe pretty well on this one. At this time of day, we can actually occasionally hear Australia and New Zealand on long path, although because, you know, where it goes the long way around the world, because that's where the antenna's pointed. You can see more signals, but since we are pointing right where the storms are, you notice that the static is worse on this one than it was on the green one, because we are only receiving energy to the east where the storms are, whereas the green one on 20 meters is receiving energy from all over the place and not concentrating it on the static to the east. So I did mention too, we also have the Kiwi Sdrs, and if you go back to our main page of sdrutah.org, the main landing page, and scroll down here a ways, the other thing is going on at the Northern Utah WebSDR. You can see to visit a Kiwi Sdr Northern Utah SDR, click here. And I would recommend you don't use these for listening to a ham band that you are that's already covered. But these can look at the whole spectrum from 0 to 30 megahertz. On the far left, we have kilohertz range frequencies, like what they're transmitting to submarines. And on the top here, we have 10 meters. And this is what all of HF looks like right now. And you can see there are a lot of signals down in 5 to 10 megahertz, but not much up higher in the 20 megahertz because the band is closed. It'll look very different this evening. And this receiver is actually one of the ones that's being used for whisper coverage. If you go to the receivers and look under the users tab down here, you'll see a lot of the user slots are taken up by Northern Utah WebSDR, and that's what's receiving whisper spots and then reporting them on the computer to whispernet.org. But there are about 8 or 9, or actually there's over a dozen of these virtual receivers available to the general public on the Kiwis. But please use them for bands that the normal WebSDR servers do not cover. Anyway, let me stop sharing the, let's see, actually one more thing. And if you want to find out where those noise graphs are to figure out what's going on, the very bottom of the sdrutah.org page, you can kind of see what all these other stations in the world are saying. You know, like in the middle of the screen, you see 80 meters is noisy at night and quiet during the daytime, whereas 20 meters is noisy in the daytime and generally quiet at night. Although you can see on this one, the lightning static is raising it to, causing it to get noisier, even though the band is supposedly closing. Anyway, did that bring up any more questions? Let's see.
Let's see. Koprokra says, I have made contacts with Japan, but I couldn't hear at home with 100 watts. And Holy Mindness says, nice shots. I'd have hit a wire.
Yeah, Gary is very mindful of the wires are on that. You don't want to fly through the lower part of the that wire antenna, but yeah. So
KC7JDS says totally impressive and awesome.
Oh well, good to hear it. Yeah, and it's fun to keep that thing going. Now, one of the things I would hope that people, one of the things I would hope people will use this WebSDR more for is improving their own HF stations. And I mean that in 2 ways. If you can hear a station at the SDR, but not at your local station, it might mean you need to improve your antenna, but it also might mean that you should go start looking for noise, find out who plugged in that last wall wart or noisy Ethernet switch that's causing all the racket. But the other thing too is comparing antennas. If you ask, I'm one of those people that really does not believe in an NVIS antenna that works very good, and an antenna that's low to the ground and radiates straight up would radiate straight up better if it were a higher antenna. And you can actually prove that to yourself on using WebSDR, because you can do an A/B comparison. But if you're into experimenting with antennas, especially on HF, for heck's sake, please use the plotting feature on a WebSDR to do it. And in case you're wondering where that is, I'll just bring it up very briefly. Let's see here, share screen. Come on. It's a feature that I don't hear people using too much. Get that off there. So if you go down, oops. Why did it do that? Okay, there we go. Right down here, under the volume control, the signal strength plot, and if you click on, I'll click on fast, so it'll go quickly. But you can, let's tune in a signal up here. Let's look at, go to find a strong signal in 75 meters. Let's see, I'll make the waterfall dimmer. There's some guys up here on the golden baronet. So we can see the little plot right here. There's sort of a scatter plot, but I wrote code for this that'll make the lines smoother instead of a random bunch of dots, and you can kind of see the signals going there. So you can tell this guy's picking a little over a little less than minus 50 dBm or so. And you can use this plot to monitor your own antenna or your own transmissions, or those of others when you're testing antennas. And please use it for that in addition to just listening. Any other comments?
Let's see. Paul Plack says, amazing presentation, thanks. Gary Crum says, actually return to home activated because of low drone battery when it was under the beam. Started to fly up the beam elements before I overrode it, the return to home. He left, huh?
Yeah, we almost had a drone fall out of the sky from 100 feet. Yeah. You know, that owl is still there. When we're there at night, we hear it hooting away, and we see it staring at us when we're out and about. So anyway, I think that pretty much wraps up the presentation. If you have any questions about that, let's see, there's a about this on the main page, the sdrutah.org page. There's a link that says about this WebSDR and contact info. And don't forget the technical information, and there's an FAQ there too for about any question you might have anything about. Let's see, Morris, I'm going to wake you up. Do you have anything to add before we wrap up the meeting?
Just thanking everybody for joining us this evening. Thank you for such an excellent presentation. I learned a lot. That wire antenna is enough to boggle one's mind. The beam antenna is a log periodic. Is that correct?
Yes, it is. They are both log periodics. I haven't quite.
They don't resemble one another at all.
Well, they kind of do if you look at the way they're wired, but yeah, but it's with the tangle of wires, unless you stare at it for a while and see where the wires go. It would essentially, the wire antenna is two of those antennas, like the big antenna, the beam antennas, pointing to the ground, but at 90 degrees from each other. That's kind of what it resembles. Now, the radiation of that wire antenna is mostly skyward. Why it works, how that works with the small end pointing into the ground, I have no idea, but it does seem to go, and it doesn't really require ground either. It's independent of the ground.
Yeah, obviously it works very well because it's very sensitive.
Right, and we occasionally have power line noise there, but we try to avoid it. We were having trouble with power there. For a few months earlier this year, our power voltage could be anywhere from 0 to 180 volts for a 120 volt line. And we're on UPS number 4 now. So But the power company did some work recently, and it's been a lot better. We seem to only have about half a dozen power outages a week now. Usually they last only a few seconds at a time. We're on the tail end of a really, really bad, noisy circuit, and our voltage, when I've been there, the voltage goes anywhere from 90 to 100, 135 volts just with normal, but we've seen it as high as 180, which tends to smoke transformers in linear supplies, or blow fuses at least. So we keep having to replace fuses now and then. So we're looking at one thing we're looking for is a 50 amp supply that can take anywhere from 90 to 250 volts input. We can get one, but we're looking at ways to improve the regulation other than a solar transformer, because the problem with the solar transformer, it'll handle that. The problem is 1,000 watts of solar transformer takes 1,000 watts, whether you're using 1,000 or none, and we don't need to add that much to the power bill. Anyway.
Yeah, the switching power supply would seem like it would be able to handle a wide range of input voltages.
Right. We know full before the fact that if we get a switching supply, we'll have to put it in a box with tons of filtering. Otherwise, it becomes a transmitter on site, and we do not like transmitters on site. Yeah. By the way, the whole thing isn't connected. We are 3 wireless hops away from fiber. So, yeah, because that's what you get when you're in the middle of nowhere.
Oh, well.
Laird's asking, after being abandoned for so long, what antenna repairs were required to get the site running? And Paul Plack asked, would solar power work at the site?
Let's see, solar power would work at the site as supplemental power. One thing we're considering doing is if we make a online UPS with like a 50 amp 12 volt supply, batteries, and an inverter, we would use solar to power the 12 volt side, which would take the load off it, because we do not even want to go there. We do not want to connect solar to the grid there. We would never get permission, and we're just asking for things getting blown up. Because I have solar at my house, and I wouldn't wish that on anyone. So having 12 volt power for an online UPS would be the way to go, because that would take our load off the grid. That would be excellent, and it would improve the runtime. But our static power load is about 425 watts. And if you're familiar with solar, you know that that's a house of solar to handle that much power in all conditions, plus a massive battery bank. So we would love to talk about that if there's somebody has something in mind. As far as the antenna repairs, the wire antenna needed no repairs, although we did discover there's 2 pieces of wire at about the 80-foot level that are about 1 inch apart, and they had to have been done that way by the factory guys when they installed it. And when it blows, they bash into each other. It blows above about 25 miles an hour, and you can hear a lot of crackling on 160 and the AM broadcast band as those 2 wires do this, just tap into each other. But we haven't figured out how to safely climb the tower just to put a piece of hose or plastic up there. And renting a crane at $100 an hour plus mileage isn't in the cards at the moment. The beam, though, was a whole nother matter. Somebody hacksawed off the coax at the top of the tower and left it on the ground. I don't know why. But then when we did connect it, we discovered that the bird crap from the owls being up there had literally dissolved the aluminum coax at the top. So I had to improvise a connection that's still temporary up there. And it didn't make the owls at all pleased for me to be up there for the time I was up there. But so we're going to have to replace that. What I need to find is a 1 5/8 EIA flange to N adapter. And I need to put that up there. And if somebody has one of those, great. But that's what we're kind of looking for this time, and we'll make that connection permanent. But the beam, that's the main repair we needed to the beam. Also, the tower, the north guy of the tower had pulled out of the ground by April of 2018. But fortunately, one of the locals installs fences, and they're able to use a pile driver to install some well casing, belayed well casing guy points in there that are at least as good as the concrete guy point was. So the tower hopefully isn't going to suffer the same fate as the other one did. Any other questions, Bruce?
No, there was no other questions. Gary just said credit to KC0 JRE for fixing the guy wire anchor. And a lot of people just thank you. This is great, and thunderous applause. Okay,
sounds good. I'll throw it over to you for one last time. Any of the board members want to, let's see, we haven't quite decided on a topic for the next meeting, which would be the June meeting. Might be field day. Keep your eye on the YouTube page. We'll put video or announcements up as soon as we know. Also, if you've been to the YouTube page, you notice other videos there, some field day videos. I recently added archive footage of the demolition and building of rehabilitation of Scotts Hill. Plus, we have a number of classic UARC meetings from the 90s and early 2000s up there that some people might find interesting. Morris, anything else?
Well, one thing that I would like to add to what was said earlier is that if anybody has any ideas of any topic that they would like to see expounded upon in one of our meetings, please send any one of the board members. You can send it to me, 87sr@arrl.net, and I will see that we do some discussion and try and find an appropriate person to talk about it. If you have somebody in mind, of course, please mention it. So if you've got anything that you want to hear about, let us know. That's about it. All right. Yeah, our normal club meeting address too, uarc@xmission.com, will work as well. If you don't want to, for some reason, don't want to email Morris, or just talk to Gordon, mention to Gordon or any of our board members what sort of meeting topics. We have a few in mind, but and hopefully we can get someone other than me up here to do the presentation. But let us know what you want to see. We're considering, as mentioned, in case you're tuning in late, we will announce the disposition of the steak fry the next UARC meeting, if not before. We haven't canceled it yet. Field day, we're up for ideas on what the club can do, but we encourage everyone to do their own field day, if nothing else. Go out in the field, set up an antenna, run it from your house, run it from your car, whatever. And keep your eye on the UARC webpage for options for testing for anyone who wants to upgrade or get a license, because the word is that a lot of people are clamoring, being tied up at home, that they want to, that getting a ham license might be a good idea. We'd like to help them out with that. So with that, thank you for everyone for showing up and also watching this on replay, and appreciate everyone who has participated and helped.
Now, if we just had some pizza.
I have some pizza upstairs. Stay here. I'll click to my more dramatic video background again. But anyway, all right. Thanks for everyone for watching.